the Finance of Beta. You are on.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting of October 18, 2021 at 5 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Chair, I believe Carolyn has not joined us yet, so I will be taking roll this evening. Chairman Ramon Tiger Abetha.
Here.
Councillor Jamie Cassett.
Here.
Councillor Signe Lindell.
I'm here.
Councillor Renee Villarreal.
Present.
Councillor Carol Romero Worth.
I'm here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Approval of the agenda. I would like to postpone item D, which is an ordinance relating to the City of Santa Fe Uniform Traffic Ordinance. The reason being is that Quality of Life has postponed it for more information, and just out of respect for the Quality of Life Committee and the work they're doing, I don't think there's any rush to have this heard by us without getting their recommendation first. So I would recommend that be postponed. Are there any other changes to the agenda from staff?
No other changes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just a quick question. What did staff want to do about the meeting schedule corrections? For item E?
Ms. McCoy.
Item E, the staff person is Carolyn Roybal. I believe she's on the call now. Carolyn, would you like to address?
Yes, the Finance Committee meetings are going to stay the same as proposed originally, like before the meeting started. The only correction that was made was to show the governing body meeting in March and June to be at the end of the month. So nothing changed as far as the proposal for the Finance Committee meetings. And I did verify that with the clerk's office. So we're not in conflict with Public Works at all.
Sorry, Carolyn, I mean, I have more to ask about that, but should I just pull it for conversation then?
Sure. If you,
I don't quite understand what you're saying, but I don't want to hold up our.
okay, yes, then let's pull it for conversation.
Thanks.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
Councillor Cassett,
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Lindell,
Yes.
Councillor Romero Worth,
Yes.
and Councillor Beta.
Yes. Okay, next is approval of the consent agenda. Items to be pulled off the consent agenda. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to pull item B as in boy. And item, quick clarification for item E. And that's it.
Okay, any other items to be withdrawn from the consent agenda? Can I have a motion regarding the consent agenda as amended?
Move to approve as
To approve as amended.
second.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Councillor Cassett,
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Lindell,
Yes.
Councillor Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councillor Beta.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to presentations. The first being an early childhood investment opportunities for Santa Fe. We have Mr. James Jimenez, the Executive Director of New Mexico Voices for Children, Jacob V. Hill, Research and Policy Analyst, New Mexico Voices for Children, Kate Noble, Vice President for Policy and Stakeholder Engagement, Growing Up New Mexico, and Rebecca Barron-Reese, Director for Policy Research and Communications for Growing Up New Mexico. I want to thank them for joining us. The purpose of this presentation is to kind of plant the seeds for what I think is going to be a hot topic in 2022, especially as we start getting into our ARPA funds, how we distribute them. We know that the pandemic has highlighted childcare as one of the areas that was affected most, and something that we all need to be prepared for coming out of this pandemic. The Finance Committee will ultimately, I think, make a recommendation to the governing body regarding ARPA funds. But as far as childcare specifically, I know we are going to rely heavily on the Quality of Life Committee, and a lot of the discussions and details will be vetted through that committee. But I do want to take this opportunity to at least start giving us guidance as a Finance Committee. And so thank you to both the New Mexico Voices for Children and Growing Up New Mexico for joining us today and making this presentation to us. Okay, and so who's going to start us off?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. I'll get us started today. Again, my name is Jacob Vigil, and as you said in the introduction, I'm a research and policy analyst at New Mexico Voices for Children, and we're a nonpartisan nonprofit that focuses on research-based public policy to improve the well-being of New Mexico kids and families, and we do that through the areas of healthcare, education, and economic security. I'll pass to my co-presenters from Growing Up New Mexico.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. It's great to be with you. My name is Kate Noble. As the chair mentioned, I'm the Vice President for Policy and Stakeholder Engagement with Growing Up New Mexico. And Rebecca Barron-Reese is my colleague who is here as well from Growing Up New Mexico. A few words about Growing Up New Mexico. We have been focused as an organization for about 16 years on early childhood, particularly in Santa Fe, formerly known as United Way of Santa Fe County. We rebranded just about a year ago. And those 16 years of focus on early childhood began when our president and CEO, Catherine Freeman, took the helm of the United Way of Santa Fe County. It was a little more traditional United Way before that. And also just to say, I've been in this job about 3.5 years. Rebecca and I had the great honor and opportunity of working together starting about 2.5 years ago, when we worked on the statewide needs assessment and then 3-year strategic plan for the early childhood education and care department. We're now in place. It was launched by the governor early in 2021. We do, in the policy realm, focus on building public awareness and political will for investments in early childhood care and education in New Mexico. We appreciate working a great deal to broker and work in coalition with partner like New Mexico Voices. We also support Santa Fe's Early Childhood Steering Committee, which has been in operation in Santa Fe throughout this community, looking at early childhood, and represents a range of community partners, been going for about 9 years. So moving on, just to tee up a little bit, we'll start getting specific about Santa Fe and the data here. And just to say, in particular, as you'll see on the sort of bottom left of the slide, Santa Fe Family Survey highlights, we recently did a survey of people who were accessing childcare for birth to 5 years old in Santa Fe. Santa Fe's picture can be somewhat complex because we have such a large in-commuter population. In other words, our workforce population is more significant than our resident population. We grow during the day because people have jobs here. So that was the lens we took for the family survey. And one that we've taken really just a sort of a workforce lens to a lot of the data, though we did look at the data for Santa Fe County, which is the most often updated and granular that you can get through the American Community Survey and other census type level data. So we've looked at sort of both of those lenses, and Rebecca's going to talk us through some of what we've seen.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Chair. So as you can see here, we have a total Santa Fe childcare capacity totaling nearly 2,700 slots. Though you'll see that, and that is serving all school-aged children. Though you'll see that our population under 5 years of age is over 6,000 children. So we have a big need for an additional focus, particularly on the population under 2. And over here on the right, this graph demonstrates that there's only 7% of infants and toddlers that are accessing high quality care in Santa Fe. So 161 of the total. And as Kate mentioned, we did a family survey to find out from families what they're looking for in childcare. Both, are they getting their needs met? Are they paying out of pocket? Do they need financial support? What priorities do they have? What kind of setting are they looking for? And what we heard is that 57% of families need more or a lot more childcare. Nearly 40% can't afford or are not close to being able to afford childcare. And almost 70% prioritize a caregiver having a degree or a certificate in early childhood. Over 50% of respondents are working full-time, 22% are part-time, and 13% are looking for work. And Jacob's gonna tell us a little bit about the situation of our early childhood workforce.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. It's no secret, it's been really well documented over the last year that the pandemic has really created a crisis situation for childcare in our nation and in our state. We know that many businesses have closed, many providers have left the profession, and here in Santa Fe, many mid-sized facilities have closed in just recent months. So this is something that's still happening in real time. But I want to also emphasize that, you know, some of these issues have actually been chronic features of the industry for years prior to the pandemic. So issues such as affordability and the chronic underpayment of the workforce have only been exacerbated. So, but that has also been coupled with the increased professionalization of the field, right? So as Rebecca pointed out in the survey, many families expect their providers to have certain levels of credentialing and education, but unfortunately, wages have not kept up with that increase in professionalization. And so we know that the poverty rate for early educators in New Mexico is hovers above 27%. That's twice as high as for workers in general. So it's really a tough situation for providers and results in a lot of turnover, a lot of people leaving the profession, and the impact that has had. I mean, partly just a snapshot of it, but you know, women have left the workforce since the pandemic in disproportionate numbers. So there were roughly 1.2 million fewer parents of school-age children in the workforce by the fall of 2020, and 900,000 of those parents were women. So the crisis in childcare has really had an impact that has reverberated in the economy. And just created a struggle for parents and families. And that's not, you know, that's not even including just the impact of job losses and retention rates on workers themselves, who often themselves are parents and have childcare needs as well. So if we go to the next slide, just want to recap, and you know, I've been before this committee before, and we presented some of this information, but the importance of why childcare is critical, not just for our economy, but for the future of our kids, for the development and growth of our kids. We know that 80% of the brain develops in the first 3 years. And because of that, because that's such a ripe and critical period in the development, cognitive, social, emotional, physical development of children, the return on investment is huge. So economists have found a 13% return on investment for early care and education. So those are costs, or those are benefits that accrue to the economy later in life in the form of higher graduation rates, lower incarceration rates, higher incomes earned over the lifespan, lower healthcare costs and things like that. We know that childcare for single mothers who are pursuing higher education has a 5.5% return on investment, and increases graduation rates by 21%, right? So this is, it's a very concrete benefit for women, advancing their careers, advancing their education, and which bolsters our economy. And so, it's well documented that having childcare assistance, having access to the supports that provides, leads to higher employment rates and job retention. So that's just, backing up to take a look at why is this important? Why is this sort of critical for any economy, and just sort of highlights the urgency of addressing the crisis in whatever ways that we can.
And that leads us to the opportunity before us. And this slide is really the big why. The city might consider opportunities for early childhood investments and how a city can get ahead with something like this. And really, that's what it's about. It's about closing the achievement gap and setting the foundation for economic success, because there is and will be an increasingly competitive environment for early childhood professionals. And as we have thought about this and really run through some of the possibilities of how this can work, it really does seem like there's an opportunity for the city to make some headway and create the conditions to attract, retain, develop, and really secure the workforce that is increasingly competitive. Early childhood professionals are, of course, the workforce behind the workforce. We've seen a lot of evidence about retention for businesses and absenteeism. So there's really an opportunity in terms of what's possible here. And that's what's possible is made possible by what's supported. So as Jacob was talking about, women in the workforce, particularly working families, people who are raising children, and businesses all depend on early childhood workers being available. And communities with workforce supports like childcare better retain and attract a qualified workforce. We see that home-based care is an opportunity for scaling and developing entrepreneurs as parents and families, and really have been looking at how this whole ecosystem can work together and how one-time money can make a difference. And we'll be getting into some of the details later, but as Jacob touched upon, a lot of the evidence is that there's an incredibly high return on investment for investments in early childhood. And Rebecca's been researching a little bit of what has gone on in San Antonio.
Yeah, so San Antonio more recently has been held up as an example, as back in 2012, Mayor Julian Castro bet on 4-year-olds to transform San Antonio and grow the economy, and did so through investing in the scaling up of universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. So this was looking at a way that the city could actually get involved in making this long-term investment and seeing what kinds of outcomes and results came through, which we now have after 7 years of implementation. So public forums showed a broad consent for the city to invest in helping San Antonio's children get ahead And as Jacob highlighted, early care and education really did show the highest return on investment. The city made the case that this pre-K for San Antonio was also a workforce development program with a long-term payoff. So with investments in professional development across the city and higher competitive salaries, pre-K for San Antonio is now recruiting teachers from across the country, not just from within San Antonio or within Texas, but from elsewhere. So after 7 years of implementation, the positive effects of high quality early childhood education have shown a big return, most recently through the publishing of an impartial cost benefit analysis by Westat, which has found that conservative estimates have shown nearly a $4,000 per child return for each pre-K student, as well as nearly 7.4 million overall across all the investments made annually. So they're seeing ripple effects from this program now over the course of these last 7 years. And now Kate's going to tell us a little bit about the setting and context for some of the recommendations that we've all been building towards, and how the Early Childhood Steering Committee has been one home for some of this work.
So the Early Childhood Steering Committee is a group that formed close to 9 years ago to really align resources around early childhood in Santa Fe. So it's been going a long, long time. And as part of the statewide needs assessment and strategic plan, as well as some other work that we've done at Growing Up New Mexico, we've gotten to look at a lot of early childhood coalitions throughout the state. And Santa Fe's is really one of the most comprehensive, in part because it has robust engagement from our hospital, from Christus St. Vincent. We have folks there looking to connect health systems to early childhood. We also have, through PMS, Head Start providers, private providers, the community college, the public schools, the community foundation, as well as the city and county of Santa Fe. And we appreciate that Councillor Cassett has attended some of the recent meetings of the Early Childhood Steering Committee. So this is a group that has been meeting between monthly and quarterly over the years, depending on sort of the need and urgency. Most recently, it's been more like monthly. And again, coordinating, sharing ideas and knowledge, and really working to get innovative about what could happen in Santa Fe. And ultimately, this is really important context and foundation for what we see as how things could go forward, because Santa Fe has the benefit of already having a pretty broad and robust group to talk things through about how an innovation project, a lab, if you will, throughout the city of Santa Fe could be coordinated. There's also, I should mention, a significant funding opportunity from the state of New Mexico. They've put out a request for proposals for coalitions like this to apply, basically to strengthen and coordinate resources better. It is up to $150,000 each year for 2 years that this RFP is available. They put out in the RFP, I believe that there are about 18 existing coalitions that there's good awareness of throughout the state of New Mexico, and that they believe they can fund 21 of these opportunities. So there's a pretty good chance that the Early Childhood Steering Committee will have some decent funding to do this alignment and coordination.
So I'm now here to warn us all that these are draft ideas, and we present them as sort of potential opportunities, examples of investments, and are eager to hear your questions and input throughout the remainder of the presentation. And these recommendations have been developed primarily through Santa Fe's Early Childhood Steering Committee and with Growing Up New Mexico, as Kate described, and most recently with Jacob, with New Mexico Voices, who's a longtime partner of Growing Up New Mexico, and who's brought a lot of wonderful insight and collaboration to this presentation. And Jacob will walk us through the parameters for these as well. By the way, I'm sorry that I can't seem to undo the screen, my video feed. So I apologize that I'm appearing to be off camera.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, just a few things that we've sort of set forth as parameters or things to think about as we think about opportunities to invest and just what makes for really effective early childhood policy. So investing really and having a focus on the earliest years is critical. I mean, this is just something that we it's just a huge focus of both our organizations and increasingly, you know, the research and the direction of the field has really put just more focus on those earliest years in terms of where the investments are most effective. And then just, you know, thinking about how it's also a really good use for one-time money. I think a lot of you might know, and as Kate and Rebecca mentioned, the state is going to have considerable one-time funds from COVID relief packages, and what they've been able to do to bolster the field and to bolster the workforce is pretty great. And so that's just a way to think about the use of one-time funds in order to strengthen a workforce or to strengthen an industry and the workforce that's going to really pay dividends in the long run. And then just thinking about where are those points where the city can strengthen early childhood and make that difference, whether it's, you know, removing barriers or sort of filling in gaps or thinking creatively in ways that are just more attuned to the local context. So those are just some parameters that we've set out to think about the recommendations that Rebecca and Kate are going to now talk about.
So we'll go ahead, and again, these are draft for discussion only, warning. They're draft ideas only. And just some examples really to get things going. And the Early Childhood Steering Committee, I should also thank Ms. McCoy, who's attended recently, as have some other city staff, including Kira Ochoa and Julie Sanchez, Rich Brown, and Janice Krish. So we've had some great conversations with some folks from the city of Santa Fe. One idea is sort of an early childhood work study program where, in essence, there would be, and all of these really look at braiding funding. So it would not just be one source of funding. It would be funding brought together from a number of different sources, and ideally to include the main source of funding for early childhood, which is the subsidy that is provided through the state from the federal government, often known as CCDBG, Child Care Development Block Grant funding. But one idea is a work study program where, in essence, we could do something like full-time pay for people to be really working full-time, but half-time in school and half-time in an internship, getting experience in the early childhood profession. And you can see on that right column, we have thought about some potential outcomes and metrics for success here. Certainly, we could measure the number of people who get a credential and degree through something like that, the number of workforce hours that are mobilized, and the number of children receiving high quality care. Another example is providing incentives for degrees and credentials. And we've talked about how some of these programs could even be stacked on top of each other. I think that would be our preference. This is a particularly a profession that has been just starved for a long, long time. We often talk about teachers and poor pay in the education profession. And the fact is, early childhood is at the neglected end of that spectrum. This is really, a lot of folks have done a lot of great work to professionalize and increase funding, but this is turning the biggest of super tankers in terms of making up for the starvation of the system for many, many years. So again, incentivizing degrees and credentials, the idea being payments at milestones for achievement of and service. We think about maybe, if you get halfway to a degree, there's a $5,000 incentive. If you get all the way to a degree, there's a $10,000 payout. And then maybe there's a $10,000 forgivable loan after a period of service in Santa Fe. So again, the metrics are there on the right-hand column. Another idea we had was basically incentivizing what we call sort of the baseline competence, which is the 45-hour certificate in early childhood. Just a straight, if there's a $3,000, pick your number, incentive for getting the early childhood certificate, which is really what's required to work in a childcare setting. And the point of that, as is noted in the right-hand column there, is the number of people, really we would want to grow the pipeline of talent would be the big measure. That would be a way to get people in, because recruitment to this profession and getting people to decide that they want to be in early childhood is not necessarily an easy task right now. So providing an incentive, and then you will have people who just fall in love, because what we know about this profession is it's really a heart-led profession. It's because people love kids and really care about being there to help them develop. We also, and these are sort of in some of the buckets that in conversation with city staff, we talked about workforce, regulatory, and business development. On the regulatory improvements, just to touch on that, because it's very specific stuff. And in our experience, it would be best done with some deep listening and community engagement to understand the barriers that people are experiencing in the field. And then really, it could be an easy one-time cost of, excuse the phone, a professional analysis for what regulatory barriers are in place and need to be removed, because that's really a lot of detailed work that needs to involve probably both the community and expertise in particularly fire and land use in city departments. And we would anticipate that that could help increase childcare capacity, because that's really what it's all about, sort of shrinking that gap that we saw in one of the early slides with, the number of, there's roughly 1,000 kids per age in Santa Fe is one way to think about it. And we have more like 100 slots available. So to shrink that gap. And Rebecca's going to take the next piece.
Yeah. So as Kate mentioned, the three kind of categories of recommendations we've built here were workforce, regulatory improvements, and then business development. And so what you see here are some examples of business development supports. The first one has to do with building cohorts with incentives for achieving key milestones. And this is something that we've seen happen in other parts of New Mexico, and has been growing as the need for home-based care providers in particular has become more of a focus, both nationally and in our state as well. So looking at cohorts of 12 to 15 caregivers who receive stipends and coaching support in order to increase their quality of caring as they care for kids, as well as just creating a network of support that they have available to them, which increases their professional stability and helps them regularize their businesses. The second example leads off of that, which is a shared services hub. So a little bit more sophisticated as a network of support for things like back office or other collaborative functions. So professional development, purchasing, handling taxes and other accounting services, or HR. So these collaborative functions, for example, would help to, again, increase stability, as well as build a infrastructure for childcare business, which we don't really currently have here in Santa Fe, but would provide somewhat of a platform for that. And then lastly, we know there's a need for capital improvements. This is something we've heard a lot of, and that's typically a good use of one-time funding. But it would certainly require some more targeted research and analysis to understand the specific opportunities and costs for what kind of investments would be appropriate. So we really do see Santa Fe as being a potential leader or innovator in this space, alongside some of the really thoughtful partners that we've been working with, including the Early Childhood Steering Committee, of course, as well as New Mexico Voices, to bring that broad community support and alignment. And Jacob, do you have any thoughts you'd like to add at this point?
Sure. Yeah. You know, as Rebecca said, I mean, I think that, you know, a lot of the movement has been happening sort of on the state level. And, you know, those are, you know, in most cases, pretty unprecedented, you know, investments in early childhood, things that we've long advocated for. But I think that there's a way in which smaller local governments have the opportunity to be innovation labs for addressing issues and gaps that you know that the state might not be able to cover, right? And that having that engagement of stakeholders who are really familiar with the community and having that input could really you know make sort of lead to policies and innovations that could be scaled up, and that, you know, other jurisdictions could look at and see, okay, this worked really well in Santa Fe. This is something that could be effective in other areas. So I think that's an exciting part of sort of how we've been thinking about this and as well.
Yes, and I want to underline that. I think that's really why we're here today, is we're really hoping that the city of Santa Fe will be a big part of making this community into an innovation lab. There's a lot of emphasis on this nationally, I want to say as well. We are a part of a number of different initiatives, as is New Mexico Voices for Children, I believe, that are really looking at transforming childcare and going big, thinking really how this can be the moment, because in emerging from a pandemic, with the recovery funding, we have an opportunity, partly because during the pandemic, we got real clear on how important childcare is for workers and for working families. And this opportunity, this sort of political moment, if you will, is really ripe at the local and state and national level. And Santa Fe, in a way, is perfect because we are a community that really needs to be proactive about retaining our working families and setting the stage to that economic success that child care can provide a foundation for. And again, the sort of competitiveness of communities, the being able to be an economic winner as things reshape post-pandemic, particularly in a place with a high cost of living and struggling to attract and retain working families. So just want to also say, and we can move to the last slide, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Growing Up New Mexico and New Mexico Voices for Children are organizations that are resources to you. We live and breathe this stuff, and we're very happy to help with questions, gathering information, and whatever the folks of the city of Santa Fe need as we go forward on this path. So now I think at the pleasure of the chair, we're happy to stand for questions.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's, yeah, questions, comments from the committee. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just wanted to thank you all for your presentation and the information that you've been providing for us, and good to see familiar faces in different contexts. Just happy that you all are committed to this work. There's a lot of work to be done. I appreciate the recommendations too. I had a couple of questions just to understand some things, like what we've done in the past or what we've been involved with for the city. I'm just curious what, how this connects back to Opportunity Santa Fe. the program that initially was taking a piece of early childhood development into that, into their goals. And then how, I guess I'm unclear because we have not gotten any updates on how the city of Santa Fe is actually still involved with Opportunity Santa Fe, at least in my world. I don't think we've gotten any updates. So I'm just curious about that first. I don't know who could answer that piece.
I can start with the current situation. Opportunity Santa Fe was very recently, and for a decent amount of time, the agent upon which the Early Childhood Steering Committee rested, with new staff and new plans at the Santa Fe Community Foundation. That has pivoted, and Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are still in the process of strategic planning and have focused more on the middle school age, as far as I know. So Opportunity Santa Fe and the Community Foundation are still engaged with the Early Childhood Steering Committee, but they're not the organizing entity behind it as they were before. Rebecca, do you know more?
That's about as much as I know. And yes, as Kate mentioned, they still participate. They also continue to host the EOIF, which is I want to say Emerging Opportunities for Young Families grant, which focuses on young parents in Santa Fe who are also part of a cohort. And I'm sure Rachel Kuchar would be very happy to provide any update on their work.
So it's kind of peripheral, still connected to what you all are doing, but they have a different emphasis now?
Right, so they're still participating in the Early Childhood Steering Committee, though they aren't the organizing entity at the moment.
Okay, that makes sense. And let's see, the other piece, I guess when I think about the problems with how we're supporting providers, I just look to the state and the regulatory side that's been so broken. Olay has fought up, and really worked hard on this piece at the state level. And I'm not sure like what gains have been made. I'm just curious. To me, that's like the bigger piece of the puzzle here before even like local government. Like there's a system that doesn't function at the state level. So I'm just wondering, does that have to happen first before you feel like at the city level we can make we can tackle some of these recommendations? Because from my understanding, it's like the accreditation and what they put providers through, and the formula that pays for a portion of their work. And then I know you added, what we could do to, supplement that. But I guess I'm just curious, like, what gains have been made in that area at the state level?
So I can start, and then think it's probably worth giving Jacob, or it's worth recognizing that James Jimenez is also here now that the presentations I can see, who of course leads New Mexico Voices for Children and knows a lot about all of this. But just, a brief history of recent times. Some of the big changes are that we were the fifth state, or sometimes they say fourth in the nation, to create an early childhood department. It's one of the more comprehensive departments because it brings in early intervention and home visiting, as well as pre-K and childcare, and really, and there's a lot of work to now, as we mentioned, connect to maternal and child health. A big foundational change, and this is part of the ripeness for action right now, took place as of July 1. And a lot of the headlines were about the expansion to 350% of federal poverty level for childcare subsidy eligibility for families. The importance of that cannot be overstated. It is hugely important that we expand eligibility for families, because there's sort of often, and I bet there is at 350%, this cliff effect of people who make just over too much money, but still can't afford the cost of childcare because it costs so much. But fundamentally, a big thing that also happened at that time is we got new rates for the child care subsidy. And those child care subsidy rates, we're the first state in the nation to base our rates on what they call an alternative methodology, which is in essence, what is the cost of quality care? They have always been set on what they call a market rate study before, which is in essence, what does care cost, or what can people afford to pay, or what, that sort of thing. It's what people can afford, what the market can afford, not what quality care costs. So as the first state in the nation, Washington, D.C. did it before. But they're of course not a state. So New Mexico gets the honor of being the first state in the nation to set alternative rates, and they changed substantially. Home-based care, which we see partly because of its distributed and scalable nature as something that is really interesting to look at, saw the biggest rate increases in those new rates that came into effect July 1. So with the department that does bring a lot of these pieces together, and with the new rates, we've seen a lot of foundational shifting. And we've talked about this opportunity that is coming with the Land Grant Permanent Fund to really have the constitutional amendment that would provide an additional distribution of funding from our Land Grant Permanent Fund that will be on the ballot in November 2022. As if we get our system built to a good, strong point, that funding can come in and support some of these structural changes that are actually moving fairly quickly right now. And again, the pandemic has kind of accelerated the urgency and a lot of large scale thinking about how these systems can change. So the moment that we see is pretty ripe. And James or Jacob, just want to see what I'm missing. I know you probably have other perspectives to fill
in. You covered that pretty well, Kate. You know, yeah, it is hard to overstate how significant those recent changes are. And at Voices, we long advocated and brought attention to the issue of the cliff effect in childcare, and how that the sort of the drop off in benefits with rising income was really, really hampering access. And you know, I think. And it also just sort of has been a long journey, and maybe James could speak more to this, but also just sort of shaping the narrative around the effectiveness of childcare on the state level. I mean, you know, we have really tried to you know, influence that narrative and show how you know, it's not just effective for early childhood development, but it's not just a workforce, something to bolster the workforce, but it's part of a comprehensive sort of suite of policies that now are, you know, mostly housed under the new department, which has been great. But you know, so you know, the LFC, as many of us know, has been you know, we've kind of tried to influence the narrative that's come out of there, and it hasn't always been sort of like what we would how we would want policy to be shaped, or the messaging that comes out around childcare that we know to be a really effective and really critical piece of the early childhood of policy. So I think that's just another thing to bring to mind. I don't know, James, would you add anything to that?
Good evening, everybody. I'm James Jimenez. I'm the Executive Director of New Mexico Voices for Children. Thank you for the opportunity for us to present with Kate and Rebecca. I think Kate and Jacob really covered it. The only piece that I would add is that some of you will remember that several years ago, the Legislative Finance Committee did a report on child care that was highly critical of the educational outcomes of the child care system, which we thought was kind of an unfair metric, given that we've never funded childcare as an education program. We funded it as a work support program. What Kate has just been talking about is a real hugely important fundamental shift in the way that we think about early childhood education, that it is in fact an educational program that does have work support benefits to it. That really what we are doing in the early education space is preparing children to be successful when they hit the schoolhouse doors at kindergarten. And then there are other programs that can help bolster that. The model that was previously used to fund childcare system, I think, was based upon the flawed premise that a market rate somehow determined kind of what the system should be. And what I've been really, really pleased with is that Secretary Groginski has restarted the conversation about, no, let's not start the conversation from there. We're going to start the conversation from what is it that we want out of a system? What is it that we want in terms of the educational outcomes? What is it that we want in terms of affordability? What is it that we want for the workforce? What is it that we want to help build the economy around the state, and particularly in Santa Fe? So I think that it's kind of a long-winded answer, Counselor, to your question, but I do believe that what Kate laid out was such a hugely important shift that it's going to take time for it to be implemented across the state with fidelity to the underlying ideas about building the system, but at least we're moving in the right direction finally.
Thank you all for those details. And actually that covered some of my other questions. I was curious about the land grant permanent fund and when we get to vote on it. Until then, I guess my final question is what, given that that's not going to be voted on till next year, and then the implementation will probably take another, I don't know, I'm guessing 6 months, maybe more. I don't know. I'm just wondering if we had to pick something that the city could do fairly quickly, given some of our constraints, or I guess I'm just thinking about the ARPA funds and what would be, obviously we're going to get feedback from the community, but I guess I'm curious what you all think. What would be low-hanging fruit in your mind that we could use for ARPA? And I appreciate your recommendations. I'm just thinking like some of those things are going to take time, about like structural changes and mindset changes and kind of redirecting our priorities. But I guess I'm curious about what you think would be low-hanging fruit for ARPA.
I can jump in. Obviously not afraid of that. Ultimately, you know, we've spent a lot of time on this, and you know, the question that is still, we think, the right question is about how can the city of Santa Fe get ahead, because this and be ahead of the game in addressing these issues, in taking advantage of the return on investment, and in particular supporting working families in a strong way. And ultimately, you know, I think the answer is to pay people to get their degrees and credentials. If we provided a fast and nimble incentive to support the workforce and to pay people to get their credentials, this is a workforce that has always figured it out before. You know, there's a lot of work mothers in the early childhood workforce, and they have balanced everything. So, you know, I think we honestly can almost overthink what we need to do. Whereas if we just put some stakes out there, you know, if you get halfway to your associate's degree, here's a $5,000 carrot for you. If you get all the way to your associate's degree, here's $10,000. If you stay in Santa Fe and work for 3-5 years, whatever it is, then you have your $15,000 loan forgiven, type of thing. If we invest in the workforce and, you know, put carrots out there to these women who have always figured out how to balance all the things, we really suspect that you could get some quick returns and some loyalty in this community. I don't know if anybody else wants to throw out an answer to that question.
Yeah, I guess I would also just add that the partnership we have with the Santa Fe Community College and being a leader and a thought partner and how to move nimbly and quickly, as Kate mentioned, should also not be overstated. I think that there's a lot of appetite and alignment to move fast on these kinds of recommendations and innovations. Looking at, again, as we've mentioned before, braided funding opportunities that may be coming from any number of directions and in addition to public funds. So I think there are actors that are sort of ready to move the plans forward.
Thank you. Thank you both. The other one I was thinking about, I guess I see it more as like a backbone for the nonprofit sector, or maybe helping to devise what it would look like, but that shared services hub, all those things that would be very helpful to have back office support. Nonprofits need that too, but I mean, I can see that this would be something that early childhood businesses would also benefit from. So just wanted to highlight that. I think that's it for now. I appreciate all the information and details. Yeah, it's a little overwhelming thinking about the needs and what we need to do and all the other pieces that we need to support, including affordable housing. So I appreciate all of you and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Councilwoman Cassette.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you all again for being here. I don't think I need to, well, I'll beat my drum a little bit again on this topic, as obviously it's been one that I've been delving into. And Councilwoman Villarreal, you bring up, such a valuable point about all these other economic needs. And the one thing that I can never do is unwind the intrinsic nature of childcare to meeting those economic needs in the city. And obviously I live this every day. I'm a single mom with a 3-year-old. And so it's of course something that I can really tangibly hold, that understanding of the economic impact and what are the lost economic opportunities for young women who have to leave the workforce, or young parents, because men do too, just not in as large of numbers, but for these young families that a parent is leaving the workforce because of the lack of childcare. So to the point of what I believe Kate was saying, or maybe Rebecca, that seeing the pandemic has really exacerbated this issue as many others, but really seeing the kind of this moment of opportunity where there are funding sources that are coming through from, feds, from the states. There's a lot of nonprofits. There's a lot of actors in this field that are really ready to pounce on this because it has become such an issue, and because it really is impacting so many other industries in our community as people are not able to hire, that this is a unique moment in time. And so I do really want to thank Chairman Abeta, as well as Carol Romero-Worth, for sharing the quality of life and bringing these presentations here and having these discussions, because I'm very glad that we are discussing this right now, because this is a moment that I want to make sure we don't miss. I did have a couple questions, as I've been digging into this and as I've been having meetings with a number of people. What I'm really seeing is that it's a huge crux of the issue in Santa Fe is, again, back to that workforce understanding. And I know in some of the early childhood steering committee meetings, we've had this discussion, and I'm not sure if there's a bit more of an answer here, of really figuring out how do we quantify the need of the workforce, and back to that point of how does Santa Fe get ahead in really building that workforce? Because if we are very honest, as with everything else that we do, we're competing with the rest of the region in terms of the workforce. We have a lot of people that do not live in the city, as Kate had mentioned at the beginning, and commute in. And so understanding what that hole is that we need to fill in, and do we have a little bit more of an idea of how do we figure out what that number looks like? I mean, what is that goal that we are really reaching to?
So we've done a lot of math around this, and we truly come to the number that if you had 100 more workers in Santa Fe, it would make a big difference in childcare. Some of that is, just back of the envelope calculations. Again, if you are roughly and this is more population level, not the entire workforce that might need Santa Fe childcare, but about 1,000 kids. And then we took about half of those being in childcare, and this is again 0 to age 5. So we've left school age childcare to another conversation. Ultimately, you know, I think we, as we've wrestled with this question, have really come to the conclusion that, you know, 50 to 100 people would make a giant difference in Santa Fe's early childhood workforce. And that we could, you know, slice numbers in a number of different ways, and we'd be happy to do that if that was something that the council's committee was interested in. I think we would say, you know, we can keep quantifying it. We know the need is great. We know that, you know, in the number of dozens, the impact could be great. And to really answer your question is thought about how we might really quantify this, because one of the things that we saw in our survey is that demand is shifting. And so if there were robust childcare options, we might actually see demand increase than if we took the moment in time snapshot. Even if we had perfect information from the families out there, we might see more families deciding to, more parents, even grandparents deciding to enter the workforce or take on part-time work if there was really robust childcare out there. So demand is shifting. We could, and to answer your question, because we've really thought about how this might work, there's probably no way than robust survey polling to really get a sense and representative sampling of the Santa Fe need out there. And again, you know, we had, Rebecca may remember the number, we had pretty good responses for that Santa Fe survey that we did. Again, our lens was that you have responsibility for a child birth through 5 that needs or has care in Santa Fe. So, you know, we could think about ways to look at that more. And might say, you know, the bias should be to action because it is a way to get ahead. But the need, we know, is great.
Yeah, thank you. That's it's been my understanding as I've been speaking with everybody, and even just you know, my own childcare center. I feel like every other week they send another email saying, we are looking for a new teacher again. And so that kind of brings me to one of my other questions regarding San Antonio and some of the work that they did. We know that retention in the field is hard because it's tough work. It doesn't pay very well. And that's something that we've, you know, been, and I believe that the state has also been talking about, and with the increase in the quality care, that hopefully that will increase some rates for childcare providers. But has San Antonio had better luck in really creating a more stable workforce? And with the understanding that honestly, the nature of childcare is that there is almost an expected turnover, in the sense that it is something that a lot of young parents do because they already have to do it themselves. So they may as well get some money at the same time. But there are individuals that really go into, you know, being professional childcare providers. And has San Antonio, in some of the work they've done, hit on a model that maybe prevent some of that turnover and some of that loss in that field, especially as we're looking at some of these front end investments in building that pipeline? How do we, you know, start to maintain a bit more of a pipeline and not constantly be in this emergency mode?
Right. Yeah, I think, you know, while I don't have, and unfortunately some of the analysis I've seen doesn't have like a retention number, but what I will say is that from what I've read, is that one of the things that they've done that seems to have made a critical difference in their recruitment, which I believe would be very meaningful in terms of how often you're retaining your workforce, is just paying a high and competitive salary. So while I see, and somewhat to Councilwoman Villarreal's question of like sort of where can the city play along with some of the state investments, I see the San Antonio example as interesting because the state of Texas also has some similar investments. Obviously, when this program started, it was before the pandemic. It was a different federal funding landscape. However, the state were making investments and the city chose to augment in very strategic ways. And so what San Antonio did was to say, we're going to go all in on professional development, and it's going to be across the city. And we're going to pay people more than what, let's say, the state going rate was at the time. And so what you saw was an opportunity that early educators from across the country then responded to quickly. And what I believe to be true, but I say I don't have retention numbers, is that likely had a very powerful impact on retention.
So the city actually augmented the salary of early childhood education.
Right. They went above what, let's say, the going rate was for early educators.
Okay.
And again, investing in the professional development quite heavily.
Right. But
Yeah.
kind of people on the front end. I mean, and it does make sense that if, when people are going and getting degrees and there is this professional piece that it brings investment into the field. So
yeah, and sort of how do you capture some of that professional development investment and try to localize that really strongly with the partners that we have in place in Santa Fe, obviously including the community college, where the city can then start to think about what sets Santa Fe apart from other regions that are perhaps looking more to the state trends as opposed to then adding a local strategy on top.
thank you. And then, Kate, you had mentioned, that one of those things is that our population grows during the day. Do we have an idea if people tend to prefer childcare close to home or close to work, and how that might be impacting childcare in Santa Fe?
I'm not sure we do. And I bet it would be, it would break down somewhat evenly and probably go throughout the spectrum of people's diverse lives, where they have family members who can do childcare, where there are slots available. I think we certainly do know that there are lots of people who come in and want their child nearby, in part just because if there's an emergency, if there's a fall on the playground, you name it, they don't want to be an hour away from their kid, but we don't have absolute numbers on that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was, I thought was kind of an interesting piece that I hadn't thought about with this yet. I think we've covered quite a bit here. One of the models that I know has been discussed that I'm really interested in is that basically almost like a work study program, because the need to get people into the classroom immediately is so incredibly crucial, while at the same time looking at those longer term investments. And so I find a model like that very fascinating, and I'd really be curious to see where it potentially has been done successfully in other areas, or other cities, other localities, if we have a model for that, to look to, as we're kind of analyzing what some opportunities we have. But I think that does, depending on how quickly something like that could be stood up, in collaboration with our partners, something that I'm really interested in, because again, the need is here right now. And, we had Dr. White talk about that the childcare industry is recovering at a slower rate than some of our other key industries in the city. So really seeing how we can immediately hit into that pipeline, I think, is something very important for us to look at. And again, how we might build on something that later we might be able to utilize state dollars to pull into a system that we've already set up, and understanding that opportunity is there. And so I think better understanding what some of the opportunities might be from the state is something that I'm really interested in, and hearing what that's going to be looking like at some point, what they're looking to fund, what some of those ideas are moving forward. I do know it has to go through the ballot still, but yeah, how do we really layer those dollars? How do we leverage the dollars, and how do we leverage the programming, and how do we set up a system that then we can take advantage of state and federal dollars coming through? Because again, this is a moment, not just here, but statewide and nationwide. And I want to make sure that the city, that we have positioned ourselves in a place that we can really take that money, make sure that we're not leaving anything on the table to best serve our community. So thank you all again so much for being here. I really, I greatly appreciate all your work and time and attention here.
Okay, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be really brief. I just want to thank our presenters for coming, for providing the information about the work that you're doing. I think, as Kate probably said, something like 24/7, something like that. You guys are out there thinking and working on this issue. I also would just point to, if you haven't listened to a podcast, The Daily, the New York Times on the 12th, did something about what's happening at the federal level and some of the potential there. And as we, start these conversations and look at how best the city can play a role in solving this enormous problem, just want to make everybody aware that there's some federal legislation as well. And it's pending, so don't know what its chances are, but certainly it's an indication of just how big this problem is and how many people are really looking and getting serious about what we can do at all levels of government. So anyway, thank you, everyone. That's all I have for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Then I think that wraps it up. I just want to say thank you to New Mexico Voices for Children and Growing Up New Mexico. This presentation was extremely helpful, and I am very appreciative of your willingness to make recommendations and try to help get us focused. One of my frustrations sometimes is that as a city, we want to get involved in a certain initiative or area, and we try to reinvent the wheel. But as your presentation pointed out, there's already a lot of organizations that are working on this and kind of creating this focus for us. So I appreciate you all for coming and making this presentation, and I look forward to continuing to discuss this and ultimately implementing some of these ideas. So thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, before our guests leave, can I just make a request that we get the presentation emailed to the committee?
Yes, and I think, didn't Kate, you already sent us an email, right?
Mr. Chair, councilors, I did send the email to the entire body earlier today after I received it from Kate. So thank you, Kate.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you, Kate.
and
Yeah,
sorry,
okay.
it was late in the day. We were tweaking till the end.
Okay, thank you. So then that brings us to our action items that were pulled off of the consent calendar. The first is item B, which is a resolution establishing City of Santa Fe legislative priorities for consideration by the New Mexico State Legislature during the 55th legislature. And Councilwoman Villarreal pulled this off, and I see that Chairman Rivera from Public Works is with us also. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I was just assuming we were going to talk about this and trying to figure out which legislative priorities would be listed. Because at our council meeting, it didn't seem like there was like 10 potentials, right? And so I guess I'm just trying to figure out and understand the our timeline for this and when we're going to actually start narrowing it down. I'm assuming we were using it in committee time to try to narrow that down. So I guess I'm just trying to understand what's the best method here.
Okay, Ms. Willer, I think this is the time to narrow it down. Am I right? Or are we going to have more time? I know the Public Works Committee came up with we were able to come up with 8 priorities. And when you compare those 8 priorities with the memo in the packet, 6 of them are the same. So we're only off by a little bit. Was it your intent to have the Finance Committee try to come out with a recommendation for 5 this evening, or what is the timeline? That's a good question that Councilwoman Villarreal has.
Thank you so much, Chairman, and Councilor Villarreal, for the question. This item is scheduled to be a governing body on October 27th. And it was the goal to have the top 5 capital requests identified by then. We have a little bit of time, so if there's more deliberation needed, we did have quite a bit of deliberation in Public Works. And so that is the work to be done in the committee, is to sort of get there. But we do have a little bit of time if more time is needed. We could delay one meeting. I think there's only one meeting in November though, so then that would be That's as long as we can delay because we have to get the legislative packet put together, the booklet for the breakfast that'll be on approximately December 12th.
Okay, and yeah, what we did at Public Works, which was pretty good, is we just started with each member giving their top 5, and then the chair took the common ones of the top 5 and kind of said, okay, well, we have 3 or 4 that are common, so that'll make up 4. And then if we were able to compromise on others, we did. And then and ultimately we weren't, and that's why we came up with 8. But again, even there was 3 or 4 that were common. And so I don't know if each committee member wants to give their 5, we can do that and see how many we have in common, and then go from there. Councilwoman Romero Worth, you have your hand up, and then, but before we go to Councilwoman Villarreal, did you have other questions or comments?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I wouldn't be able to give you my top 5 unless I understood other funding sources that we could direct for some of these that we all know all of these are important. So it's not saying one is better than the other, one is more important. I guess I'm just trying to narrow it down in the way that we can rely on other funding sources, such as, a GRT bond, the infrastructure, federal funds, potentially ARPA, and then what was a 4th one?
GO.
So given that those are the sources, I guess I would like to hear out of the 10 that are listed here, the potential for using other funds, or that these make more sense to go for legislative funding. And then part of me also, we do want to support the airport infrastructure. It's just that after that presentation and the amount of money that we still need to push to get through, sometimes I'm just not quite sure if we're going to get that, if it's realistic to ask for more funding. Just like last year, we were told to hold off. So I'd like to hear about that too. And then, so maybe start there. I have some other questions about the language in the resolution. There were some things taken off that I think are still relevant. That I think, even though it's a short session, that we need to potentially state as our kind of values areas that we've been grappling with for the city. And I have some in mind, but I guess maybe I'll start with this piece first.
Thank you so much, Chairman, Councilor Villarreal. Actually, this top 10 that we proposed did include some consideration on our part about those other funding sources and what was a good fit for them. So for instance, the fixed route vehicle replacement, the transit buses, we have a bunch of them coming due at the same time. And so we've been trying for the last 2 budget years to try to take bites out of it, but we've been completely unsuccessful. So we sort of have this $10 million liability looming that we're trying to fund, but we think that's probably a really good one for the federal infrastructure money, right? Because it's transit. So that seems like a really good fit with that. So we probably wouldn't recommend that. Broadband, same thing. We've heard that digital infrastructure is going to be in that in the federal bill. The other thing that you don't see in this list is seniors improvements, because of course, Director Rinaldi takes care of that separately through the special senior funding, and he's very effective that way. So you don't see that there. One of the things that you see on this list is particularly targeted for GO bond money, and that is the library. This is design money that we're asking for so that we could actually get in there and really find out, what does the 21st Century Library have in it? Are we going to remodel Ferguson? Does that work? How much does it cost? And then by the time we get to the GO next year, we could actually have a package that we could present to the voters. And so we thought that might be good to package that up and get ready for that. To clarify about the airport, actually, this request is requesting that the legislature give us some funds that will replace the city funds that we just allocated to that contract. So we had to put in 12 million of our own money. I think getting 5, if we start thinking about these big projects and maybe the legislature helps us with 75% of the cost and we pay for 25%, the teen center is going to shake out about that way. Maybe that's a good way to think about the airport. So we're looking for 5 or 6 million back so that we can use our own money for other needs inside the city. So that's what this is. This is not additional. This is to, and we actually have sent out some feelers to our delegation about their receptivity to that idea, and they feel much better about funding us now that we will have a contract. I can guarantee you those contractors, they're going to build that airport in 360 days. They're going to be out there with bulldozers within 30 days. So there'll definitely be some action to see, which I think will be really helpful. What else can I tell you? The South Capitol area road reconstruction, that's probably not a great legislative request, although it is right next to the legislature, right? So they drive on it, but it is a neighborhood thing where they like to be more regionally impactful with their contributions. So that one's kind of on the fence, but we also think there'll probably be road money from the federal dollars. We'll also certainly be looking for a big chunk of road money from the GRT bond, probably between 5 and 10 million will be for roads. The GEO bond probably won't be about, just road rehabilitation and repairs, but might be about new road projects that are a little bit more sort of important to community members. And so I think I think that answers some of the questions you asked me. Were there others? Maybe Director McCoy has more to add.
Yeah, I think a good way, when I was being introduced to GEO bonds versus GRT bonds, a good rule of thumb is, especially since we have to take the GEO bond to the public for a vote, is are any of these projects something that our constituents would vote on, right? Would vote to approve. So potential for public safety projects, potentially for, we've talked about affordable housing in the past with a general obligation bond, potentially community centers, potentially road projects, those types of things, and what would benefit our constituents because they would have to be voting for those bonds in an election.
So just to follow up before we move on, I guess I'm just curious about Fire Station 2, if that's something that would go under a GEO bond because it would more likely garner public support.
I think we've been thinking that way too, that it would probably, and the fire department might needs a couple other things too, like their fire administration building, fire station #1. So it seems like we could put together a strong public safety package there.
Well, and I would just add though, Fire Station 2 was a priority and it was designed and we were ready to go. And then so then to put it off another year, GEO bond, okay, maybe, but there was a commitment that was made because of the annexation agreement. We designed it, we were ready to start construction, and then that's just, that's my comment on Fire Station #2 and why it was a priority of mine in the top 5, because it's already a project that's been designed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and councilors, I think it is also important to understand the stacking of funding. Like Director Wheeler was talking about with the teen center, it's turning out to be about 25% from the city's funding sources and 75% that was funded by the legislative capital outlay process. And so again, whether it is important to keep that in mind, that the city, whether it's a GEO bond or a GRT bond, could put in some funding, some backing, financial backing into these projects, but that does not preclude us from going to the state to request either full funding or even partial funding to assist us.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is about for Swan Park for the next phases. That to me sounds like more of a legislative potential. Is there any other funding source you think that could be used? I know stacking would be essential, but I'm just curious if we'd be relying on, if you think legislative funding would be more appropriate for that.
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, yes, I think that's right. I think, whether or not parks get money in the infrastructure bill, I haven't heard the words. It is regional park, it is South Side, it serves a big community of part of our growth. I think those are really attractive things that the legislature gave us $1 million to parks in general last year. So it seems that they are interested in supporting parks. It's a big piece of, it's a lot of money for the GRT bond to take, $3.5 million out for one park. So, we have a lot of needs to address, like, playground equipment here and there, and, repairing slide things, and, those kinds of things are great for GRT bond, but a big project like this, you're right, I think is a sort of an attractive one for the legislature. And I think you remember in the memo, the legislature also gave us $1 million towards the Midtown infrastructure. So they are focused on that, and it's really helpful. Obviously support for the airport has been demonstrated, and parks in general. I think, yeah, that's last year's. And then last year, the district priorities each were funded at $300,000. And that was double what we asked for at $150,000 per legislative priority. I mean, per district priority, sorry.
Got it. Okay. I'll yield the floor for now. Just hear from my colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would just echo Councilwoman Villarreal about, making sure that we are going to the right pot for these requests. I completely agree that, sounds like the feds and possibly the state are, very interested in the transportation and broadband. And I take to heart also, the fact that libraries do well in bonds. That's why you often see them at the state level in the GO bond year. Senior centers do well in bonds. You see them at the state level. I think this is nuanced in the sense that I think what you're asking us to do, Regina, is to make this a top 5 priority so that we can position ourselves to include the actual construction of the library in the GO bond. So that seems like kind of smart planning to me to put that in the top 5. And so, in my mind, I would not. I think the airport is our number 1. It should be top of the list. We have been trying to get that going for a long time, and now we have the contract, and we're, advancing some of the funds. It's going to be super important that we kind of backfill the advance that we're making. So to me, that's certainly high. Midtown, the infrastructure needs there are a lot. And I think that's something that lots of legislators can buy into. So I think that's super important. And, and then I think to the chairman's point, the fire station is something that we were ready to, put our hard hats on and get our shovels. And then we kind of backed away because of the pandemic, I believe. And so, as I recall, to me, I think those would be my, oh, and I forgot to mention Swan Park. We started down that path. So to me, it would be airport, Swan Park, Midtown, fire station, and the library bond. I will say again, I'm thrilled to have the South Capitol area road reconstruction on the ICIP list. I'm fine if it doesn't make the top 5. I do think that's something that we need to find some money for, but I'm delighted that it's on that list as something that really needs to be addressed. And let's see, is there any, and I guess my only question would be, is there any reason why we didn't say Swan Park, why we said Southwest Activity Node Park? I just wonder if you shouldn't put in parentheses Swan Park, because it took me a while. I'm like, what the heck is that? And then I realized, and so I don't want to throw people that, this is some sort of new thing we're doing and we haven't finished all the other things that we're doing. So just flag that. And I think that's all I have. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Cassette.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think I have some very similar comments. Again, the really positioning ourselves well, looking at our different funding sources, making sure that we are being smart with them. for me, Midtown is of course very high at the top of my list, given the extensive need that we have there, and how crucial that project is to our community. Really, it's getting a lot of attention and we're really rolling, and I want to make sure that we have the ability to keep up with that momentum and keep moving forward. If we've heard loud and clear from the community that we need to keep pushing along with Midtown. The one that I actually, I know that we already had kind of a long, extensive discussion of, and I'm curious about other opportunities to fund for medians. And I know that it doesn't sound exciting, but one, we all get a lot of discussion about weeds, and two, for me, and I know I've brought this up multiple times in multiple meetings, what it does for our workforce, what it does for our ability to take care of our parks, which I hear just so much about, and that is so crucial. And so understanding medians, not so much as a means to an end of just the median, but really the ripple effect that it has for the crews that are maintaining our parks and are maintaining our trails, and these pieces that I hear so loud and clear from my constituents, that it is crucial that we take care of these. And so I do want to hear a little bit more about the median project and what potential other funding sources, because it's sounding like there's some other things that I agree are really kind of popping it down the list to maybe number 6 or 10, somewhere in there. And so I'm curious about what other possibility we have for there, or, to your point, Regina, if we get money for the airport, we take out city dollars and we can put them towards other things. So I'd just like to hear a little bit more about potential funding sources for medians.
Thank you so much, Chairman, Councilor Cassett. So medians would definitely be a potential for our GRT bond, right? Because that is deferred maintenance. It's something that maybe isn't sort of important enough to residents to want to, spend their own money on, like feeling like they're buying something. But I think it's really important for our town because if you've looked at Albuquerque's medians lately and their gateway medians, they're actually like super impressive. And you're like in a place like you get it. This is the desert Southwest. It has a Native American influence. They are sensitive to the roadrunner. You just get a message about them. And our medians are like so lacking in that department. And it ends up that we even have control and responsibility of the medians on St. Francis through the road transfer agreement with DOT. So the GRT bond would definitely be another place that we could look for that, I think. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was timing of the funds, which I didn't talk about before. So probably the soonest money we'll see of all of those types of capital funds that we were talking about would be the GRT bond, right? Because that's under our control. We'll be moving the packet through governing body and then fund sometime next year, maybe by summer or something. Whereas with the legislature, most likely, if we get appropriations in the session, we won't see the grant agreements till next September. That's typically when we see it. So the first money might be GRT, second money might be legislative, third money probably GO. Who knows when the federal money is going to show up? I have no idea about that really. But yeah, so one of the things I was just thinking about was the library design. If we want to put that in a GO package, we might want to get that going ASAP. And that might be better suited from a timing perspective for the GRT bond actually than to wait for legislative money unless they've got general fund money, in which case we would get agreements maybe as soon as June. And I don't know, Mary, Director McCoy, if you know what kinds of money they're going to be giving out this year.
Mr. Chair, Director Wheeler, I am not privy to that information. I think we can expect a mix. That being said, we also have non-recurring dollars in ARPA as well. I do want to, remind the committee, I believe we did talk about that earlier today in relation to the child care conversation that you had. That's 15 million that will be coming to the city, and the city is doing a pretty robust public input process over the next month for that, and councilors will be getting information on what the public has identified as priorities.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the library, because that actually, as you were talking, that I started to think about, well, are we actually going to have the design ready in time? Because we'd be looking to put a GO bond on the ballot next November. So I mean, that's tough because for me, that library is also really crucial. Again, being part of the Midtown puzzle, as well as, as I think I mentioned a governing body the other day, there are very few things that I feel like I've heard, almost 100% agreement on. And one of those is Fogelson stays, and we, rehabilitate Fogelson, and we utilize Fogelson. And so, if we don't put this as a legislative priority, for me, that means that would absolutely, I would want to see it on that GRT bond, because I think getting ready and lining ourselves up and making ourselves in the best position possible to potentially get that passed as a GO bond in November is really crucial. And I think it's really important for our community to be moving forward with the 21st century library and to be preserving Fogelson, which is really so incredibly beloved by the community, and really listening there. So I guess I'd be willing to potentially, if that actually works better for timing, to pull the library off. But it would definitely need to be on that GRT bond. So that said, assuming the library would stay on, I think my top 5 would be the same as what Councilor Romero-Worth laid out. With the airport, Swan, Midtown, library, fire station 2, and then seeing that medium beautification definitely on a GRT, and some of those other pieces on a GRT bond that would move forward sooner rather than later. If we did decide to pop the library onto a GRT bond, then I think that kind of becomes a question of what would fill that number 5 spot. What would be something else that potentially is best served here? Because I mean, maybe then we would put medians back on, but it does sound like if that can be filled with a GRT, then I'm not sure. So if we were to decide that a library and medians would be best served by GRT, Regina, do you have a thought for what else might fit in that number 5 slot? Because it sounds like everything else that I'm seeing here has other potential funding sources that would be moving through.
Chairman, thank you. Councilor Cassett, thank you so much for that question. It's worth thinking about how much money we're going to get to. And so how far down the list are we going to get funded, right? So what you usually get is one big chunky one, right? So I think we're looking for the airport on that to get back some of our money that we're putting in. If that comes back at 4 or 5 or 6, then we're probably really only looking at maybe 3 million more somewhere distributed across our money. So, you might really be thinking about your top 3 in that way. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. And so, I don't know, I feel like the medians are, if we were to put both the medians and the library on the GRT bond, that's kind of a heavy load on the GRT bond that's going to need to carry, $10 million for 2 years of road rehabilitation, and it's going to need to carry some pool repairs, and it's going to, those kinds of things. So I feel like medians, even if we could just get some of the money from the legislature and then fund the rest ourselves in the GRT bond, that might be a great way to go.
Okay. So then it may make sense to put medians on there and GRT bond for the library design, because that helps us better with timing in terms of a GO bond. And then just while we're looking at the list, the Southside Library Community Plaza, can you speak a little bit more to that?
Sure, Chairman, Councilor Cassett. So you're probably aware that there's a big plaza in front of the Southside Library, but it's really completely unusable. It's landscaped with short trees that are about as tall as a human, so you can't get under them. There's no irrigation, so they don't do well. It's kind of some funny pavement that's not very conducive to walking. So the team at the Southside Library has conducted pop-up events outside their library using tents and other kind of infrastructure. And they really see an opportunity of that plaza to be much more functional for use in programming, outdoor reading spaces, gathering spaces. And that's what that project is.
Okay. And then in terms of funding sources, there are other potential opportunities. Again, are we looking at GO bonds? I know Friends of the Library raises money, and that could potentially be an opportunity with them.
Chairman, Councilor Cassett, I think you're right. We could think about as we look at what, so what we'll do for the GRT bond process is that we'll, using input from all the departments, we'll put a package together of potential projects that's, at least 10 million over what you could possibly afford so that we could narrow it down. And that might be one that we could put on there, and we could think about it for the GO. It's its first time on the ICIP list. It's actually a new entry to the capital list at all. And so it isn't all that common for a brand new project to make it right to the top right off the bat, but it is such a compelling project at a good price with infrastructure that we already have, that we wanted to, like, some of these in the lower part of the list are really just starting to get the governing body acquainted with these projects and begin to think about their priority in the context of all the rest of the things that we have to do.
Okay, thank you. So with that conversation in mind, I think probably how I might order this would be Airport, Midtown, Fire Station 2, Swan, medians would be probably my top 5 in that order, with the very strong understanding that Fogelson Library design is coming forward in a GRT. Real fast, while I have the floor, I was hoping to get some updates on what we were given last year. Obviously, Teen Center, I'm aware of, mostly the $1 million for parks. What is happening with that at this time?
That's a great question, Chairman. Councilor Cassett, we have not received our legislative appropriations from last session. So I got an update today. We expect them to sell the bonds in December, and then the agreements usually show up within a couple of months of that. So maybe February we'll have the funds. Working with Director McDonald on prioritizing the activities, of course. We're also, so what our plan is at this moment is to get funds from impact fees to repair the 2 big courts that need repair. That's about $800,000 of work, 900. So we'll use impact fees for that. And then we might need some of the legislative appropriation to fix the rest of any other courts that need to be repaired. But that would leave us, something like $800,000 of that $1 million appropriation to allocate to things like additional playground equipment and other kinds of improvements to the parks.
Okay, or potentially fixing Regal, which
that'll be in the GRT bond.
Oh, okay. Oh, wonderful.
For
Great.
sure.
And by courts, you mean tennis courts, correct?
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. And then obviously I know what's happening with Teen Center Midtown. So, okay, I think those are all my questions and comments. I'll yield the floor for now. Thank you so much, Regina.
Okay, Councilwoman Lindell.
Thanks, Chair. So on this list that's in our packet, this is in the October 12th memorandum. The 10 items that are on this list, we had a rather robust discussion at Public Works that we came up, we narrowed down to 8 items. And of the 8 items, missing from this list is City Hall and Arroyo Chamiso Crossing and the Southside Library Plaza, which we just talked about briefly. What happened to those?
Chairman, Councilor Lindell, those projects the Public Works Committee pulled from further down the list of the ICIP list. So just to make sure everybody's clear, I think we've mentioned it before, on the ICIP submittal to the state, only the top 5 have any significant ranking, and then all the rest are just a list in any order that is inconsequential. But the Public Works Committee pulled City Hall, and this memo was written before the Public Works Committee meeting, so I haven't modified the memo to match that, but that's right. The Public Works Committee suggested that we consider the new Consolidated City Services Center as a potential project and the Arroyo Chamiso Crossing project. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah. I'm just, because it isn't on the list, it doesn't get really get a conversation here. I think that Arroyo Chamizo crossing is extremely important. And I don't, one of the lines in the sand on this list for me is medians. And I think that Counselor Cassett made some really excellent points on they're an annual mammoth problem. And it's an area that I think that city staff feels constantly whacked about. It is not possible for our workforce at this point in time to keep up with the medians. And the levels of complaint that they get, it's really not fair. So the medians will be a real line in the sand for me. Going on a little further to the district projects that are listed, don't we usually have an amount of money that we try to keep those projects under? Because it looks like some of these projects are mighty pricey.
Chairman, Councillor Lindell, actually, these are exactly the same. You are correct. We have typically tried to put small dollar amount projects in there that would need no more than $150,000 or $300,000, but there's almost nothing that you could do with that kind of money these days. And so these are the same district priorities we had last year, exactly the same, except for Harrison Road as a replacement, because District 1's priority last year was Paseo de las Vistas repavement. And we're going to combine the $300,000 provided from the legislature with $300,000 that Mark Brooks has remaining from some savings on some pavement. We'll put that together and we'll repave Paseo de las Vistas and get that one done. So District 1 can put Harrison Road on there now. And what happened was before these projects were funded, we hadn't really super scoped them out. And now that we got some funding from the legislature, we scoped them out and these are the actual cost of the projects. But once again, if they were to provide us with another $300,000 towards each of these, you can see that that would get us a really long way. That would really help us through design of each one, at least, if not even into some construction.
Well, I'm looking at like City Council District 4. It's almost $2.5 million to reconstruct Governor Miles Road. That seems like a very unlikely district distribution to me. Well, I don't know why we're doing that.
Because we did it last year, this was the same priority. If you think about it, 10% of the total project cost will get us into design. So we have enough money for design right now. Another 10% will get us into some right-of-way acquisition if we need to do that. And so it kind of is helpful actually to fund projects with enough money to get it into design and then keep working on the construction money for a couple of years.
Okay. I would just say that for me, the Arroyo Chamizo project seems like a project that we really need to put some attention and some money to. I don't know if it comes legislatively or if, that's a bond thing, but that's been sitting out there for a very, very long time. And for me, the medians really need to be in the top 5 in the list. I mean, I can overlook many other wishes that I have for this list, but the medians, I've been here since 2014, and it's time that we put some attention to these and, however much it costs per median, however we decide to do this, I think that that's a project. And was it you, Ms. Wheeler, that was saying how great like the entry medians look in Albuquerque? we deserve absolutely nothing less. Nothing less. And that's one that I probably doesn't happen that often, but my feet are probably in buckets of cement over that one. So take note, friends. That's all I have, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm okay with switching out medians for or putting medians in place of the library, given the timing that Regina talked about. Because I thought we'd be able to get that money and do the design so we could be in position for the GO bond. So it doesn't sound like that money comes down the pipe in time to help us. But I am curious, and I guess I would just comment that I think City Hall, asking for money for City Hall right now is a little premature. I think we have not had the necessary conversations and buy-in from the community. And we don't really, we're just starting to identify talk publicly about the need for a centralized city facility. And so I think we need more time to speak with the community. But I am sort of curious, the Arroyo Chamisa crossing, where is that in the process? I know there were some, I think they were early neighborhood notification meetings, I don't know, 2 years ago, right before the pandemic, maybe. Bring me up to speed on where that project is, and is it positioned yet to be ready for asking the legislature? And I can't remember how much money, but the other thing about City Hall is that we have these other projects out there that we kind of need to finish, the airport being the very most important. And then, and then Midtown, and then the fire station, because we were just about ready. So just curious, tell me about the crossing.
Thank you, Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth. So yes, Arroyo Chamiso Crossing did have a public meeting to consider alternatives. So the first thing you do is put a bunch of alternatives on the table and select the preferred alternative. Out of that public meeting that fall came a preferred alternative of the extensions of Richards Avenue as the preferred alternative. So now we're in phase 2B, which is the further analysis of the preferred alternative. We're expecting to have a public meeting soon. I was going to say fall, but it's fall, so it should be happening soon. We have a contractor managing that project for us, actually Leroy Pacheco, who used to be our engineering supervisor. And we're wrapping up that section, and then the next phase of the project will be full-on design, which will, be a really expensive and important piece. It'll include identifying what right-of-way we need to purchase, and then, what kind of treatments to the arroyo, the bridge, how do we deal with that? Right now, we also, you might remember, have $5 million of funding from our federal delegation for this project for construction. So it actually is important that we do get some funding for the design of the project and get that completed in order to leverage those federal funds properly. And design runs about 8 to 10% of that total project cost that you see on the ICIP list.
So, and are there other places to get that money? I guess then I would go back to where Councilor Lindell started, which is we weren't even going to talk about this tonight, but for the fact that she's on the Public Works Committee and brought it up. I mean, should we be making that part of the top 5, or are there other funds?
It is important. It is an important project, as Councilor Lindell said, and to our community as a whole, and also to the fact that we have the funding stack already accumulating. The other fund, I think that would be a good potential. There's 2. One of them would be the federal infrastructure money, right? We know for sure that's going to do big, this kind of a road that like really, we could actually, Ramella has actually done some back of the envelope work to identify the reduction in our carbon footprint that's provided by this extension of Richards. So that's one funding source. And then certainly we do have our GRT bond and then the legislative funds.
So not, I mean, if it doesn't make the top 5, we've got, sounds like 2 other pots that would be appropriate. And certainly the federal money would be important. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councilwoman Lindell, and then Councilwoman Cassette, and then Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Chair. It's an old raised hand. I'll lower it.
Okay, Councilwoman Cassette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick follow-up on Arroyo Chamizo crossing. And Regina, I feel like we've had this conversation before. Isn't this also something that there potentially is NMDOT dollars, some of the money coming through that we discussed through MPO? I know that this is frequently on that list. Isn't that another potential funding source for some of the pots of money we can accrue?
Chairman, Councilor Cassett, that's correct. They haven't funded it yet, but yes, I think you're right. DOT funding is a potential. And I think I'm noticing that the whole ICIP list is not attached to this agenda item. Is that what you see in the packet? I'm so sorry. It should be. It was, that's important for you to be able to see because that, you know, of course, everything on the list. So I can send that to you right now. I'm so sorry. And we'll attach that. But yes, DOT is a potential funding source, but Ramella has let me know that, you know, she's looking for funding for this, which makes me think that she doesn't see a DOT funding source that looks likely for this.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As much as I like the Arroyo Chamizo Crossing project, I wouldn't fund it through this source. I think there's other places that we need to get it. And then City Hall, we know that we have serious needs to improve our current infrastructure. And if that means we put so much money in what we have right now for City Hall. So I just don't think we're ready yet, like my colleague said, to have that discussion. Although I think all of us know there needs to be serious discussion about how to reimagine City Hall, and not necessarily where it is right now, but because we have some serious needs in that building. The only way I'd probably support medians is, I mean, I think the case that we can make is now that we're taking over roads that used to be state, we have way more to figure out. Cerrillos and St. Francis, there's like trees growing. I mean, they're weeds. Well, they're Chinese elms, but I keep thinking about that median that it's right above St. Michael's on St. Francis. It's really bad. So all of that, I'm saying that because I think that that makes sense. I'm just curious if they would fund that. I don't know if you got any kind of sense from our legislative delegation, if that's something that they would fund.
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, I actually did not check with them about that. I did check with DOT to see if they thought that they might fund it, and there's not. DOT actually cannot, by their statutes, fund medians only as 1% of any road construction project.
Wow.
So just kind of explains why our medians look the way they do. But I haven't had a chance to talk to the legislative delegation about that. And I should say that I did, on Councilor Chair Rivera's request, reach out to Mark Duran to be available to the governing body to talk about this at the October 27th meeting. So he'll, and maybe I could even reach out to him with that question and see if we could get some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about the potential for that. And if that's something that they have funded in the past. I can't think of any at the moment, but maybe in the way past they've funded something like that. So before we would add it as top 5, I would like to know if medians is something that's even feasible, or there's that appetite from our legislative delegation to fund something like that. So that's just a little caveat to that piece. We didn't have the full list, but I just want to put a bug in everybody's ear. We need serious funding for Cerro Gordo. It's massive. There's going to be need for reconstruction. There's major erosion issues, and that's a historic area. I just think that I don't think in this case, because of the need for all these other projects and the fact that this is a road project, but I'm just letting you all know our need for that is pretty massive, probably just as much as what Councilor Romero Worth was talking about in South Capitol. In this case, I feel like it's even more dire because there's a drop off and there's just huge erosion issues. So I guess I just want to flag that as we start thinking of funding sources and not necessarily legislative funding at this moment, but that is something that I think we're going to have to piecemeal with different funding sources in order to fund that. Because what was the price tag for that again? Because I don't have it in front of me. You just sent it.
I did. I think we're carrying it. Let me take a look. I was gonna say a number, but Cerro Gordo. One of the things I'd like to say about that too is that as you might remember in the last legislative, so Cerro Gordo, we're carrying a $6 million price tag on that. So 600,000 would get us into design, which would be really like $1 million towards design, and right away would be a really great way to start that project. We're going to have a lot of public engagement, of course. So we'll take some time with that. We'll be in design for at least a year, maybe two. And the other thing is that so they did get a legislative appropriation of $250,000, I think, that was scraped away. And so I kind of expect that the homeowners association might lobby for that again and might get funded again. And which, if they did, maybe we could match that with our GRT bond to get us into some design on this project.
Yeah, I'd like to see that as a priority. I think Councilor Lindell feels the same way. It's scary.
Could I ask a question, Councilor Villarreal?
Please.
On that road, the Cerro Gordo is on the ICIP list, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's all I needed to know, so that if someone from the delegation did want to put some money toward it, it's on the list. Thank you.
Yes, for sure. Thank you. Okay, well then in the case of just trying to narrow this down, I would say Swan Park, and we probably should designate what phase that is that we're seeking.
Thank you. I'll fix the name. It'll be Swan Park Phase 2.
Okay. Midtown Infrastructure, Airport Terminal, Fire Station number 2, and medians with just emphasis on taking over state roads and the requirement we're going to have for that. Yeah, and I'm in favor of the library, but if we think that there's other funding sources that could get us moving along more efficiently, then I'm for that as well. The other question I had in terms of the resolution, and I wanted to see if there's things in here that are still relevant. And then I just had one clarification. So I'm assuming all the things that are added to the be further resolved are still relevant because there's still potential legislation that might impact to these areas. So including early childhood education. So that one, I'm assuming why that's still in there. The one that was added that I don't understand is on page 4. It says that governing body supports and endorses any legislation that would increase funding for the New Mexico Tourism Department for use in advertising, statewide co-op grant program, and/or personnel expansion. So we had that in last year, and I'm just wondering if that's in there because nothing shifted, if that's still potentially something we would want to support because it didn't gain traction, or do you know the status of that?
I don't know. I don't know. All I know is that it was on our list last year, and I thought, it's always good for Santa Fe when the state promotes itself as a destination for tourism. So, but I can check and see if there's anything more specific than that.
Yeah, that'd be good to understand. And then I didn't understand this one because it was also related to New Mexico tourism, but using ARPA funds as a one-time allocation, monies received from ARPA that would go towards tourism also. So that was news to me. I didn't know. And if it made sense for us to place that on our list. So if you could get back to me about that, that would be helpful. What I didn't see on here, but we did have last year, are, and there's probably a potential call for this particular topic, but I'm probably going to add an amendment to add some language about eviction prevention. And some opportunities for mitigation between renters and landlords. So I have some language I'm going to craft because I think those might actually get discussed at the legislature, even if it's a short session, and some other things about the Housing Trust Fund. The other thing I'm wanting to consider, because there's potential for reconsidering it, even though it did pass, was paid sick leave. And we had that in our language last year. And I want to make sure that we are stating that we still support that, because I've heard some grumblings of some industries that want to take that off. So I just want to put those in, and I'll add some amendments for hopefully for our next meeting that we can consider. The other thing I wanted to know is, do we need to add anything related to cannabis? I know it passed. However, I'm just curious if there's things that we need to re-emphasize about that, that affect us, and if there's anything coming through the legislature that would be like cleanup of the current passage of that legislation. So if someone could get back to me about that. I mean, my concern is still this, like, water efficiency and water conservation, and how we can support that in this cannabis, like, high water use industry. So I don't know if there's anything going through the legislature that would support that. So if you can find out, I guess, Regina, that falls into your court, but I would like to know if there's something we need to state about that, if there's something that we should know about.
Thank you, Chairman. Councilor Villarreal. I will pass all of those notes on to Jesse, as well as other department directors that might be able to answer those questions.
Great, thank you. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Chairman Rivera, it looks like the Finance Committee has a top 5 for you, not necessarily in this order, but it will be Swan Park 2, Midtown Campus, the airport, Fire Station 2, and medians. And I don't know if Chair Rivera is still with us. So with that, can I have a motion to approve the resolution with those? Oh, there's Chairman Rivera. So Mr. Chairman, anything else you need from the Finance Committee?
No, thank you. I do want to apologize that the list from Public Works was not in your packet. I did ask it to be there, but hopefully moving forward, it will be in the future list that we discuss. But I was glad to see that it was similar to the discussion at Public Works, and ultimately, I think we're pretty much all in agreement on what the top 5 should be. So thank you for your work on this, Mr. Chair, and we'll look forward to this moving on.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can I have a motion regarding item B?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve item B with the amendment to include that how we're going to do this, to amend the top 5 to include the airport, Midtown infrastructure, Fire Station number 2, Swan Park phase 2, and medians.
All right, we got a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Any further discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
She is excused.
Okay, and Counselor Beta.
Yes. Okay, so that item is passed. That brings us to the next item that was pulled from consent, which was E, a request approval of the 2022 Finance Committee meeting schedule. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This came up because when I was looking at the schedule, where we had set council meetings, city council meetings, there were a couple months where the finance meeting was the Monday of that week of council meetings, which is not how it's set up. But I think, Carolyn, I know you tried to explain to me, but, and then I just saw your email. If you could just let us know, were those dates incorrect about the city council meetings? Is that what was?
Yes, they were incorrect. I talked with Geraldine, and she said that the March governing body meeting would be March 30th, and the June meeting, the last one, will be June 29th. So that does not present a conflict with Public Works.
Okay.
With that being said, though, I was looking at the calendar, and I'm not clear on the August, the last meeting the governing body will have in August. So that date may or may not change for the Finance Committee meetings. But other than that, everything else looks like it's right on. And it's your call. I mean, if this is just a draft, it's a tentative proposal. All the committee meeting information will go to the city clerk's office, and then they will compose a final agenda or a final calendar for the year.
Okay.
But I'm open to whatever you want to do, Councilor Vieira.
No meetings for the whole year of 2022. I'm just kidding.
Hey, I got that on record, girl.
I'm just teasing. I think, are you saying August because it has 3? That the 29th might be not?
Well, generally the governing body holds their meetings on the second Wednesday and the last Wednesday of the month. So
Okay.
I've got a finance meeting that that may be in conflict with Public Works. I'm not sure, but if it is, I mean, it's workable. We can move it to September 6th, or if Public Works is open to another date in August, that's fine.
I think we'll just wait for the city clerk then to pull this all together, and then they'll find if there's any inconsistencies or anything that's scheduled at the same time.
Yes.
So I think at this point, I'm good with this. So I'll move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Councilor Cassett,
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Lindell,
Yes.
Councilor Beta.
Yes. Okay, so was there anything else pulled from consent, or was that it? That's it. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that brings us to matters from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick in the interest of time. I did want to point out that we have shared the first GRT distribution from the Taxation Revenue Department with you. Jarrell would have sent that earlier today. We do have very good news on our GRT revenue into the city. The fiscal year started out strong with $12.2 million in gross receipts tax revenue collected in July of 2021. This is about a 36% increase, or $3 million, compared to where we were at last year in July of 2020. So very strong start to the fiscal year. That's about 11% of our total budgeted GRT revenue for the current fiscal year. I really do encourage you to take a look at the reports and the different charts and the graphs comparing several fiscal years of time. It is also really important to note that our businesses also saw a significant increase in their taxable gross receipts across the city. taxable gross receipts year over year saw an increase of about 108 million or 40%. This is quite spectacular continued growth that we are experiencing. That being said, if you have any questions, once you do look at that report, me or any of my staff can answer any of your questions. We do anticipate the August distribution coming from TRD this week. And we do anticipate that that will also include the amount for the TRD settlement that council approved a few weeks ago. So we're looking forward to that extra one-time revenue in the month of October coming in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. Matters from the committee. I am introducing a resolution waiving the city personnel rules limitations on salary increases for the purpose of offering a wage of at least $15 per hour to all city employees in November 2021. Other matters from the committee. Councilwoman Lindell.
Chair, I'd like to be a co-sponsor. Thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Cassette.
Am I already listed as a co-sponsor? I believe I may be, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so far, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if not, I want to make sure that I'm on there.
Okay, yeah, so far we got Lindell, Romero Worth, Abeyta, Cassette, Rivera, and Garcia.
Mr.
And
Chair,
Councilwoman Villarreal.
can you add me, please? Thank you.
Yes, okay. All right, anything else from the committee? No, nothing from the chair. Our next meeting is November 1st, 2021. With that, we're adjourned. Good job.